Greetings. The purpose of this lecture is to introduce 5 central concepts that will guide our major portion of our discussions in this course. These come from the discipline of philosophy. My best hope is that this lecture will lay the foundation for developing a common language and some common content that we will be using throughout the duration of the course. Some of these concepts may seem like they're nothing new to you, but some may provide you with some new learning. However, what may be new to you might be the idea that we use all of these concepts in conjunction with one another. Let me suggest to you that the 5 concepts are certainly interrelated and, in my estimation, are highly dependent upon one another. You can apply these concepts individually, but I believe their real power is when they are used together. We will be using these 5 concepts throughout the course, and you will have ample opportunities throughout the course to practice them together. In fact, you might even tire of my emphasizing them as we go along. Let me show you what these 5 concepts are. And the 5 concepts are as follows. Truth, bias, ideas, questions, and reflection. We're going to spend a little time now talking about each one of those individually and what they mean. First of all, let's think about truth. Philosophy is all about a search for truth. We need to constantly search for truth and meaning in our lives if we are to be truly fulfilled as a human being. This becomes basically a lifelong journey, and this work is not easy. In fact, it's quite difficult. You will find that I've had the pleasure of working with a fellow by the name of Peter Senge over my career. Peter is an instructor at MIT, and he's written numerous publications in the business world. In fact, his seminal work, The Fifth Discipline, in about 1990, was something that really changed the way a lot of companies do business. Well, to make a long story short, Peter has become more interested in schools now and in leadership, and so I've had the pleasure of visiting with him and meeting with him and studying together about how leadership might be exercised in schools. And the point I'm trying to make here is that one of the 5 disciplines that Peter Senge has identified in the 5th discipline is called personal mastery. And what he talks about here is that in order to be fulfilled, we all have to be on a lifelong journey to find the truth about who we are, and where we really want to be. In other words, he's talking about a lifelong journey for truth. This is certainly not an easy journey, and it's one that we constantly are in throughout the duration of our lives. The question then becomes, how do you search for truth? We'll spend a lot of time in this course searching for truth, and we're going to complete a variety of assignments on our discussion board. We'll also be watching a movie and using the movie as a medium for applying ways to search for truth. And the written papers that you will complete in this course will also provide you with lots of opportunities to practice searching for truth. Searching for truth really involves the process of inquiry. For example, I know you're all familiar with No Child Left Behind, probably in some cases more familiar with it than you really want to be. But as we search for the truth about NCLB, we ask questions like, what is it? What does it mean? How does it affect our teaching? How does it affect student learning? How does it affect the funding of schools? And ultimately, how does it affect the way we deliver schooling? Let me suggest to you that truth is a product of the remaining 4 concepts that we're going to talk about, and it really is determined through applying all of those together. I mentioned earlier that the concepts are most powerful when you think about them and how they interact together. Searching for truth is what the 4 remaining concepts are really going to be all about, and I'm going to get into those right now. The second concept I'd like to cover then is that of bias. Bias can be defined simply as the way we see things. What we know comes to us through a set of filters that are based upon our values and our beliefs, which in turn are developed through our background experiences and our upbringing, if you will. I would suggest to you that we all have some form of bias, because it's really part of the human condition. Biases in and of themselves, for the most part, are generally not good or bad. They're just biases. I suppose on occasion one might find a bias that you might put a value on as positive or negative, but for the most part, biases are just something that we need to learn to see in ourselves. As an example, one example of a bias might be that I believe that human beings are basically good. Therefore, due to my bias, I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt and trust them. Perhaps a better example is back in my elementary school days when I was in third grade, and believe it or not, they did have third grades in those days. We didn't have chalkboards, though. We didn't have smart boards back in the day, so to speak. But anyway, when I was in third grade, my father took me out of school one day to go deer hunting. And we had a great time. We shot at lots of deer. We never really shot one, but had a good time anyway, for sure. I got back to school on Monday morning, and next thing I know, after roll had been taken, they took roll in those days too, I was called to the office. And I went into the office, and the principal called me into the inner sanctum. And there was my father sitting across the desk from my principal. And the principal told me to sit down. Said, just be quiet. I said, that's not a problem. I can do that. And after I was seated, the principal told my father and me together that I should not have been out of school that day, that I needed to work harder in school, that I really needed to apply myself, and I shouldn't be spending time out of school. It's wrong for a parent to take me out of school and to go deer hunting. And throughout the duration of this conversation, my father said, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. I was finally dismissed and able to go back to my classroom, and I wasn't sure what was going on at that point, but I made it through the day. I got home that evening and sat down to dinner with my parents, and I asked my father what was going on. He said, I made a mistake. The principal was right. I should have never taken you out of school. His bias was that whatever the principal said was right, and he was not about to question the principal's judgment, so to speak. Now, I'm sure that you have lots of parents that are like my father in your classrooms that would never question our judgment. In my role as superintendent, I didn't come across very many of those anymore, but I use that as an example of bias, and we'll go deeper into bias in just a moment. But question for you: have you ever said or seen someone that's told you that they really have no bias? If that's the case, I would question that person because, as I've suggested earlier, I think we all have bias of some kind or another. Not necessarily good, not necessarily bad, but bias, for sure. My point is that we have to learn to recognize and then understand our biases and how they affect the ways that we see things. We'll be working throughout this semester to identify our biases and understand how they affect the way we see things. A lot of our work about bias will be coming through our discussion board activities, through our conversations we have there, through our movie analysis work, and through the papers that we'll be writing. It's also helpful for us to understand that other people have bias as well. And in my opinion, this helps to explain behaviors of others and helps us to understand where other people may be coming from. For instance, think about the bias of a parent who thinks school is not a good place. Or think about the bias of a parent who doesn't ever question this, kind of like my father. Are the ways that we interact with these people different as a result of how we may perceive their bias to be? Now, I want to be a little careful here, too. And I don't want to get into the subject of mind reading necessarily because we cannot fully know what someone else's bias is. We might be able to get some glimpses of bias, though, by what we see the person doing. I can only see behaviors. I can't see what's going on in someone's head. And so anything that I would interpret from behavior may or may not always be the case. So I want to be a little careful when we think about how we might look at other people's bias. Obviously, it's best if someone tells us what their bias is. And sometimes if you can get into the right conversations with people, that will come out for sure. Let me show you another way that we can look at bias. And I'm going to cut away from myself for just a minute and go back to my projector. And I'm going to show you something here, and I'm not sure if this one's the right one or not. Yeah, I think you can see this. Hopefully, you can see this one now. Let's go here. Okay, there we are. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to completely read this or not. It may not be exactly the way I want it, but what this represents, and this is my own artwork, so you can make fun of it if you like, but what this represents is a ladder, and it's kind of difficult to see, I know, but I'll put a copy of this in our course documents so you'll have a chance to look at that. But this comes from the work of Peter Senge as well, and it's called The Ladder of Inference. You can see the title of it up here. And so when we think about the ladder of inference, it helps us to think about behaviors in terms of this particular ladder. What we see here is observable data and experiences that occur, kind of like a video recorder might record those experiences. What happens is, as a human being, is that as I see those, I select data from what I observe. I then add meanings to that data, and I make assumptions about that data. I then draw conclusions, and then eventually I adopt beliefs and actions based upon those. Now, I'm not going to focus on the top two parts or two rungs of this ladder for right now, but I'm going to give you an example that I think will help make this a little bit more understandable and relate this to what I'm talking about with bias. If we think, first of all, about something observable, let's take an example where possibly there's a student that doesn't post a report on Blackboard by a given date, all right? So that's the reality. That's what I see as an instructor. I might jump up here just a little bit and select some data from that, and I'll say, wow, this class member is not interested in the class because he or she didn't post things on time. I might also make another step up here where I might look at meanings, and I might say, this class member must be bored with the content of the class, and I might even take that a little further and say, wow, maybe my content is not very stimulating, and maybe, maybe it's not very exciting. Or I can also take another step up here and make another assumption based upon what I'm interpreting. And I could say this person may be a problem, might have a lot of late posts in this class, and further that maybe I've got a problem with course content when I think about it. And then I draw a conclusion. And the conclusion I might draw might be something like, well, the class member is really not trying, and that class member may fail. And also that maybe my conclusion is that maybe the course content isn't stimulating. Okay? So what I've done here is I've gone from what I really observed, and I've coded that with my own bias to draw some assumptions and to make some conclusions. Those may or may not, in fact, be the case. In fact, chances are they may not be the case, and they may be the wrong conclusions. So what Peter Senge says is that we need to think to ourselves, and we're going to talk in a later lecture about the idea of reflection, but we need to reflect on what we really see and understand what our biases are and know that our biases may cloud our conclusions and the things that we do. And so the closer we can get to the bottom of this ladder and the more honest we can be with ourselves about what we're really seeing, the better we are, and we can move away from bias then at that point. So again, I will put that on to our page so you'll have a chance to see that in a little more detail. Okay, let's move on then. Let's move to the second concept. Oops, I need to get back on here, don't I? There we go. See? It's probably better when you couldn't see me, right? But anyway, the second concept then is the concept of ideas. Philosophy is all about the examination of ideas. And we'll explore many ideas in this course. What is an idea? Simply put, it's simply a thought about something. An example of an idea might be no child left behind affects what schools do. Or another idea might be the traditional school calendar serves students and families very well. Or perhaps another example of an idea might be the notion of block scheduling, which is another way to rearrange instructional time during the school day. Some ideas ultimately develop into theories as well. And so, for example, if we go back to the school calendar, depending upon the way you approach the idea of a school calendar, you may develop a theory about that calendar. I had the privilege of serving as superintendent of schools in Kearney for a number of years, and in Kearney, we essentially ran two different school calendars. One was an optional calendar, we called it, for students, and in this particular calendar, started classes prior to, earlier in the fall than the regular calendar, and generally classes went on later in the spring than the normal calendar. And they took different breaks during the school year, longer breaks, for two reasons. Number one, the theory was that we felt that by extending school learning out across the year in a little better way, we didn't have to deal with the summer months of regression in learning, if you will. And secondly, we provided some enrichment opportunities for students during the year as well. So even though we didn't formally increase the number of school days, we just kind of rearranged the way we did things. That was an example of an idea. And an idea that really spurred a lot of research in a lot of places, and so eventually then it did become a theory that that would be a better calendar. Or my other thing that I want to tell you is that think about this for a minute. I'm off on calendars, I realize, and I'll try to keep this short, but what about a school calendar that's flexible, that varies the time for some students? Do you think that all students have to have the exact same number of hours and the same number of days in the school? Maybe not. Maybe there's a better way to look at that. That's an idea that eventually may develop into a theory and actually be implemented at some point in time. Okay, we'll be exploring a lot of different ideas together throughout this course, through our conversations on the discussion board and actually a lot of the interactions that we're going to have together on analyses. And in your papers, you're going to be exploring some deep ideas this semester. But before I go to the next concept, think just for a minute about how our biases might affect the development of our ideas. Go back to the ladder of inference, and you saw some conclusions and things that I reached there that really were based upon my biases. And so I would suggest that our biases profoundly affect our development of ideas. Hence, we really need to learn to identify and suspend our biases so we can more fully explore our ideas. Okay, the fourth concept is that of questions. Philosophy is all about asking deep and probing questions. This is probably the best way for us to explore our biases and to look at our ideas. Questions help us explore what we're thinking about. Questions, for example, I might ask, an example of a question is, what do I think about human nature? What do I think about the school calendar? I proposed a series of questions about No Child Left Behind a little bit earlier. Think how they might help us explore and determine truth as related to No Child Left Behind. Questioning is best when it's deep and probing in nature. For example, one of the major issues, and schools have so many issues they're dealing with right now, but one of the major issues that we're addressing is that of bullying. Students bullying other students would be one of the major things that we're looking at. One can simply ask the question, how do I stop bullying when I see it? And there's nothing wrong with that question in and of itself, and in fact, in a lot of ways, that might be an appropriate question. But it also may not lead to any kind of enduring, long-lasting solutions. Perhaps a deeper question that we should ask might be, what are the factors that lead to bullying? Are there underlying causes that can be addressed so that intervention means decrease? My point is that we need to think deeply and think beyond the surface, to ask questions, deep probing questions, and the better our questioning can be, the better we can be at processing and really developing our philosophies. Last concept is that of reflection. Reflection is essentially thinking about ideas, and it's important that we take time to reflect. The best way to explore questions and ideas is through thoughtful reflection. Reflection can also help us unearth our biases as well. One of the ways we'll be practicing reflection throughout the course is through our discussion board responses. And you've noted already that once we ask you to post something on the discussion board, we give you several days to read and to think before you pose any kind of responses to questions or issues that are on the discussion board. We're trying to practice what we preach here, and we really want to encourage you to explore and to reflect deeply throughout this course. I would also like to note that, in my opinion anyway, all of the preceding four concepts are really important, but without reflection, we may not be able to fully see what those other concepts are. So reflection is one that probably lies at the heart of how we really get to and how we address the other concepts. The idea of personal mastery that Peter Senge brings to us, again, is certainly one way that it encourages lots of reflection. We're only able to fully learn when we take the time to reflect honestly and openly on who we are, what we want, and what our current reality is, where we are right now. In my face-to-face classes, I stop prior to the end of each class, and I encourage people to journal. I want them to reflect, and I want them to think about what they learned in the classroom that day, and think about how they might apply that to their own practice and things that they do. I use that as a way to encourage people to reflect and to take the time to reflect. How do you reflect best? When do you take the time to reflect? Those are some questions that we're going to be looking at as we continue throughout this course. So, in a nutshell again, I'm going to go back just to review what our five areas of philosophy were, our concepts are. Again, as you think, there's truth, there's bias, there's ideas, there's questions, and there's reflection. Throughout this course, you will have ample time to be able to apply those five concepts, and we're going to give you lots of practice on that. Best wishes as you work to apply those concepts.